The National Economic Development and Labour Council's mandate is outdated and needs to be reviewed. That's the call from the Black Business Council. They say the labour market has changed significantly since the council's inception, and while NEDLAC has served its purpose so far, more must be done to make sure it's more inclusive. Let's find out more from the Black Business Council President, Elias Monage. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking to us this evening. So the National Economic Development and Labour Council, NEDLAC, is the vehicle by which government, labour, business and community organisations seek to cooperate through problem solving and negotiation on various challenges facing the country. And you think the structure is no longer fulfilling that mandate. Why do you say that?
I think, evening to you and the listeners of eNCA, I think it is quite correct that it comes a time in life where we need to review the mandate of various organizations, its mandate, its scope, its representativity, and particularly with the current situation that we are in the country. We are 28 years post-democratic dispensation, and we have a situation where every time government, they talk about inclusive economy, but one of the critical areas is that NEDLAC, as things stands now, it does not represent a number of sectors and industries, including even accessible businesses, if one were to use those words. It basically means that the question of representation is one of the critical areas that is no longer representative. I mean, you look, for an example, from the inception to date, there were only few labor federations. As things stand now, the labor market has changed drastically in terms of its formation, in terms of the outlook, in terms of the issues that we are confronted with. Equally so in the business cycles. We don't have one business organization. We have multiple business organizations in which majority of them, they're not represented at NEDLAC. Let alone the question that there are specific interests that Black organizations, small, medium enterprises, cooperatives, and range of other entities, they're not represented, or segments in the market, they're not represented. It basically means that the labor market, if one were to use those words, it's no longer the same as the inception when NEDLAC was formulated. And this is one of the reasons why we're basically saying, one, we need them to review the mandate of NEDLAC. Two, we need them to look at representation of NEDLAC. Three, we need also then to look at interaction, even government in its entirety, to say who represent government in those meetings at NEDLAC, so that we don't run parallel structures where the discussions are taking place at NEDLAC, but they don't find any expression in any government institution. So these are the clarion call that we're making as a Black Business Council to say the mandate of the National Economic Development Labour Council to date is now outdated and need to be reviewed. We need them to have a new mandate and scope, and the question of representation, so that inclusiveness is then seen in action, that Black organizations, Black professionals, and other segments of the economy, they're then included into this thing. For example, to talk about the youth, the question of education, the current crisis that we are in. Also, we need them to review the education system so that the students and our kids that they go to school, they need them to find a curriculum that in the main will include them in the mainstream economy, so that whatever that they're doing is then included. So that we don't deal with historical issues, we deal with the road ahead. We talk about the fourth industrial revolution. Other countries, they've even moved beyond it. We are still battling and trying to formulate basic things in the country. And this is the reason why we're basically saying, if we then talk about the reconstruction of the economy, the reset, that reset must then include reviewing the structure of NEDLAC, must review the representation, must review the mandate and the scope, and including even at certain intervals, when then do you review certain things. The other part is now the entire legislative environment and regulation, because we talk about easing the regulation, the red tape, so that businesses, they must then do business appropriately and effectively so. But we then have an institution that they still deal with a regulatory environment in a rigid form. And it does not then deal with the current realities, the current situation that we're faced with. And these are some of the issues that we're dealing with.
You there. I want to talk specifically about your relationship with BUSA. You say that the Black Business Council can no longer be represented by Business Unity South Africa at NEDLAC because your needs and what's happening on the ground no longer align. Have you applied to be part of NEDLAC independently of BUSA?
No, we are never represented by BUSA. I think we were represented, but via BUSA. So these are two different things. I'm saying our needs and our mandate is not the same as two apex business organizations. That's firstly. The second thing is that the point that we're pursuing is that we are discussing with BUSA, our colleagues from BUSA. And I think even the name BUSA, we need then to have a proper understanding that when the two organizations merge, we then form what is called the Business Unity South Africa. And now with BBC no longer part of BUSA, it cannot even continue then to carry that name. But that's another debate for another day. So the point that I'm raising is that as things stand, I mean, when BBC moved out of BUSA in 2011, they continued that name. And we then continue to be invited at their mercy when they want, and if they don't want, we're then excluded. For example, during the national minimum wage, we're part of the discussions, and we played a vital important role during the labor review, the labor relations, the basic conditions of employment, and other related acts. We were involved from the inception. And we're basically saying, as things stand now, we need to have our own direct seat. And
have you applied for that seat?
But again, no, it's not about the question of applying for a seat. Remember the current rules. The current rules, it says, if you apply, if BUSA, they're saying no, that's the end of the debate and discussions. Equally so, if other labor federations, they want to apply and sit at NEDLAC, if COSATU and NACTU and FEDUSA, they're saying no, that's the end of the road. And we're saying that cannot be right. And that's the point that we're raising. It's not about us, it's about inclusiveness. Inclusiveness, it means we need them to bring other formations that they're outside the current NEDLAC situation, given the change and the outlook of the labor market. The labor market is no longer the same. We don't have one employer organization. We don't have one apex organization. We don't have one union federation in the country. We have multiple of them. And therefore, we need them to find a way of bringing those organizations on board. Equally so, if we then talk about communities, which communities are they invited? Are they part of this thing? And who decide to say, the Alexander community, they cannot then have a direct representation, but somebody somewhere says, I represent the community. The question of the mandate, the question of a proper canvassing of position is then taken on board. So these are some of the issues that part of the review, we need them to look at a proper architecture.
Mr. Monage, sorry, we're running out of time, and I want to find out whether you are supported in these calls for change by some of the other organizations that you feel are excluded from NEDLAC.
Yes, we are supported by various organizations. I think even BUSA, I mean, we had a discussion with BUSA. They're keen and willing to relook at how we then include other businesses in the structure. That's one. Two, for example, again, you talk about Santaco is the taxi industry in the country. And how do you then talk about the transport industry without them? How do you talk about manufacturing without NUMSA being part of this thing, or SAFTU as a manufacturing federation? So these are some of the issues that we are saying, yes, other formations, they are keen and willing to come on board and be part of the discussions with us. And then I think these are some of the areas that we are basically saying, let's open this thing. Let us talk about the scope. Let us involve other organizations so that in the main, if we then talk about the reconstruction of the country, if we don't talk about rebuilding the economy. Everybody is included, whether the people, they are the hawkers, they are small businesses, they are women-owned, they are cooperatives, they're part of the discussions. We basically create a forum for people then to sit around the table and talk about these issues.
Mr.
So that
Monage,
as a
have you
country,
approached
then
NEDLAC to ask them whether they would be willing to consider these changes? Is there an ongoing discussion?
The discussion, we have started the discussions with our counterparts with BUSA. We have started the discussions with UNAFCOP.
But have the discussions reached NEDLAC yet? That's my question.
Yeah. I'm saying, remember, some of these organizations, they're not yet sitting at NEDLAC. So, and once we have consolidated the position, surely we'll then approach NEDLAC to say these are the things that we need them to be considered, let alone we have raised these issues also with the Minister of Employment and Labour, Minister Tulas Ngwesi, and even some of his colleagues in Cabinet to say we need them to relook at the question of representation, the scope, and even the mandate of this organization, so that you don't run parallel processes where government, they want them to do certain things on the legislative without a broader consultation and debate and discussions on the reset of the economy and the alignment and complementarity around policy and regulations.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. That was Black Business Council President Elias Monage.